Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. On this episode of Barkeep Upkeep, I will be discussing some glorified custom cards that appeared in the issue number 37 of InQuest magazine, released in May of 1998. Now, while these are custom cards designed by the team of people who worked at this gaming magazine, there is some merit to the idea presented behind this custom card type. That being said, the first half of this episode will be more similar to a flight since I will be discussing these cards and how they work, and the second half will be like an episode of the Brewery since I do have a microbrew based on these cards. Before beginning this episode, I want to thank and give a huge shout out to Posum Senpai over at EDH Silver's Discord channel for providing us scans of the magazine article showing these custom cards and how this custom card type works. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by purchasing your cards through my TCG Player affiliate link. However, a more significant way of supporting the channel is through my Patreon. For just $1 a month, you get early access to scheduled videos, and higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to both down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. One of the things that comes to mind when I think of Zendikar is adventure. Sure, Zendikar is now renowned more so because of Landfall and the Eldrazi, but originally its flavor was supposed to be Adventure World. So what happened? Well, huge colorless titans that can annihilate your board are going to be way more popular than adventuring. The landfall mechanic is also way more useful and practical than the quest enchantments of the first block, which I'll get into a moment. But now that we're revisiting Zendikar for the third time in a standalone set without Eldrazi, fetch lands, and the Gatewatch, what can we expect from this huge focus on adventuring? That's when I remembered the quest cards from that issue of InQuest. So what better way to kick off the beginning of Zendikar Rising spoiler season than with cards equally likely not to be in the set? The first Zendikar block had 9 enchantments with the word quest in their name that gave you a type of reward for completing a certain task. Quest for Ancient Secrets had a player shuffle their graveyard into their library by removing 5 quest counters from it, and you acquired set quest counters by putting cards into your graveyard from anywhere. Pretty straightforward stuff. Quest for the Nihil Stone was a bit harder to pull off since it triggered by an opponent discarding a card. Then at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player had no cards in their hand and the quest had 2 counters on it, you completed and that player lost 5 life. This may seem like quite a bit of hoops to jump through, but it does only cost 1 black mana. Another common trait of these enchantments is that their art had explorers looking at maps, discovering treasure, going through caves, or just exploring altogether. This solidified the feel of exploration in this subset of cards. However, if this was such a prominent theme of Zendikar, how come only 5 of them were printed in the first Zendikar set? The other 4 were printed in World Wake when the plot was now shifting towards Jace, Chandra, and Sarkhan about to release the Eldrazi. Compare that to the amount of cards with Landfall in that first Zendikar block, as well as the second Zendikar block, and it's no wonder why questing and exploring isn't the first thing on people's mind when you mention Zendikar. In fact, the Ixalan block had a stronger focus around exploration than the first Zendikar block did. Hell, Ixalan even had a mechanic called Explore, and even above Landfall, Eldrazi is a more prominent response. There are more Eldrazi in the first Zendikar block than quests, and Eldrazi only appeared in the third set of that block. As a mechanic, Landfall appears on over 40 cards throughout the block. So the Lands Matters theme of the first Zendikar was even more prominent than both the Rise of the Eldrazi and the Adventure World of Zendikar. However, with Mark Rosewater saying that this set would once again be showcasing Adventure World, maybe we'll get more quests like those original 9. Speaking of quests, let's get back to the topic of this video, which is the InQuest article I mentioned and the purpose of it. Quests are just regular enchantments. They don't have a quest subtype like the Haunted and Sanctums have their Shrine subtype. However, each of them have quest counters and have the word quest in their names. The InQuest article, which came out 11 years before the first Zendikar set, proposed the following concept. What if you can build a story while playing a game of Magic? The game already has its own story in the flavor text way back when the story and lore was meaningful and actually had equivalent weight to the game, and characters. But as Planeswalkers, remember that before the Planeswalker type the players were considered Planeswalkers, maybe we can make our own stories via the experience of playing a game. And thus the team at InQuest conceived a new card type, Quest. The point of this card type was for players to go about a convoluted yet flavorful set of actions to complete these quests and get a reward with hopefully the same weight as the work put into it. These cards were colorless and had no casting costs similar to lands. However, unlike lands, you can play more than 1 quest per turn. Additionally, you couldn't have more than 1 quest with the same name on the battlefield. Some of these were very specific. For example, Demonic Summoning required you to have a Circle of Protection in play, an artifact with the word Tome in its name, sacrifice a white creature, and then cast a demon card. That might seem like a lot of work, but not in the right deck. So if you had Circle of Protection Black, Resistance Fighter, AMD Tome, and then cast Lord of the Pit, you'd complete this quest. As a reward for completing this quest, you may ignore the upkeep triggers of your black creatures. Basically, you go through all this work so that your Lord of the Pit has no downside. Now, as a card type, quests are considered permanents but can't be targeted or destroyed unless by an effect that specifically mentions quest. Once a quest is completed, it goes to a new zone of the game called the completed quest pile. Some quests are played face down because they are secret quests. Infiltrate the ranks is an example of such a quest. In order to complete this quest, you have to regain control of a creature you own that was taken by an opponent. So if, for example, you gave control of Gilded Drake to an opponent and then played controlled magic on it, then you'd complete this quest. This seems a bit convoluted, but this was with cards available back then. Today, you can just activate Humble Defector and then activate Homeward Path after an opponent took control of it. However, if an opponent were stealing creatures, this is why this quest is played face down. There were also legendary quests like the Holy Grail. This article was written when the legend rule meant that only one legendary permanent with the same name could be on the battlefield regardless of who controlled it. That's why quests were inherently legendary without the legend supertype in order for a player to not play multiple quests of the same name, but opponents could also play them. But legendary quests meant that only one player could have it on the battlefield at a time. Besides these three types of quests, the article also has some custom cards that interacted with this new card type. King Oloran's Throne Room is one such card. The more quests you complete, the more colors it'd be able to tap down for. However, you can also activate it to tutor for a quest card when you complete another quest. So it's also a way to get more quests into your hand. There are plenty of other ways to interact with quests in the article. Surian Essentia is a legendary creature that gets +2/+2 for each quest you completed. You can also tap it and discard a non-land card to search your library for a card that can be used to fulfill the task in a quest. Using a different example than the ones I've already shown, let's say you have domination of the battlefield in play. To complete it, you need more basic lands of each basic land type than all of your opponents. So maybe you use Surian's ability to get a basic swamp in your hand or any other basic land, since these are the cards you need to complete the quest. Maybe you're trying to complete the previously mentioned demonic summoning, so you activate it to find a circle of protection. Now, being as the Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format, having a legendary creature capable of tutoring for these new card types seems incredibly interesting to me. So let's look at the rest of the quest cards shown in the article and see if they could actually make a decent enough Commander deck with Surian Essentia at the helm. Master of the Nile is definitely possible in our colors, since having access to blue means being able to include enough counterspells and control effects to be able to complete this quest. The reward is also incredibly broken, since now Interrupt is a defunct card type and is now considered instant. So basically all of our instants would be cast for free, all for just countering 3 spells or abilities in the same turn. Infiltrate the ranks is also incredibly viable in our colors, especially since we don't have to rely on opponents stealing our things of their own acts. We can just donate things to them and recover them later on by stealing them back or just regaining control of it. The reward is pretty bothersome, especially in a multiplayer game, since we get to look at the top 2 cards of their library and bottom deck whichever one we want. So we can deprive them of lands if they're mana screwed or spells if they're mana flooded, all while knowing what they'll be drawing into. Speaking of lands, Raise the Castle Walls is quite the quest to complete. We have to have a wall on the battlefield. Fortunately, the wall would then only be able to be targeted solely by effects that specifically target walls. Talk about niche. Whoever wants cards like that anymore. Then, whenever you play a land, you can instead choose to put it under the quest, and thus not really have it in play. When you complete this quest, you'll then have quite the buffer of anti-damage. Even without the clause, we can just play it safe and sound using Wall of the Nile for it. We would have to play 8 lands beneath this quest, but in our colors we can play more than enough abilities that allow us to play multiple lands per turn. Completing this quest with Wall of the Nile means that the total combat damage we receive from creatures is reduced by 8. It might not be 8 per creature, but losing 8 damage less each combat step is still nothing to scoff at. Retributive Strike is similar to demonic summoning in that it specifies cards with specific words in its name. In this case, we have to destroy our own artifact with the word rod, staff, or wand in its name. Unfortunately, as the article explains, we have to literally destroy this artifact, so you can't just sacrifice Wand or Vertebrae and call it a day. You'd have to disenchant or naturalize it. No worries, if you had to destroy a wand, just destroy Retributive Wand, which is quite coincidentally the best type of artifact to destroy for completing this quest task, so it does make me wonder. In any case, losing the wand to something like Bane of Progress isn't that bad because on its own, the wand isn't bad. But getting destroyed by a mass artifact destruction spell or effect means you still complete the quest while also wiping the board of artifacts. You also get to ping any target for 5 while also pumping the elemental. Rise from Defeat is a bit risky since you have to be at exactly 1 life to complete it. It reminds me of near-death experience, but the reward isn't as good since the enchantment just has you win the game. However, the quest can be completed at any time, so it's not limited to our upkeep like the enchantment is. That being said, we do also need to have no creatures on the battlefield. This is amazing to cast after a board wipe. Unfortunately, the best board wipe for this is Toxic Deluge, since we can wipe the board and drop to 1 life, but we can't run it in the deck since Surian is our commander. That being said, we can still run things like Book of Brass, which we can play 2 Germanic mana and 2 life to draw a card as a way to lower our life. Or, even better than that, Phyrexian Processor and pay our life total -1. Curiously enough, this was printed in from the Vault lore, and the quest type was created specifically for players to create their own stories, so it provides even more flavor to this microbrew. Completing this quest would then let us tutor straight onto the battlefield any fatty in our library, on top of gaining us 10 life to be farther away from Death's Embrace. The Baron's Hunt requires us to destroy the creature with the highest toughness or all of the ones that are tied for highest toughness. Our colors allows us to play things like Pongify, Rapid Hybridization, Beast Within, etc. So we should have no problem completing this one. Completing it allows us to cheat in any creature from our hand or graveyard, which is quite broken when you consider how easy it is to complete this quest. The Holy Grail requires having a White Knight in play, not necessarily the White Knight though, so we can have something like Knight of the Reliquary and it would still work for the quest and is also quite flavorful due to its name. We then have to regenerate a creature with the word King or Lord in its name. This step is going to be incredibly difficult since we need both a creature with that in their name as well as regenerating them. Lord is no longer a creature type, and unless this would be updated to the Noble Super type instead, we'll just have to depend on creatures like Sun Quan Lord of Wu or Urza Lord Heart Artificer, which aren't bad cards either way. Thanks to Surian's ability, if we have this quest on the battlefield, then we can tutor for either of these cards, which in and of itself is amazing. You can also take further advantage of this and tutor for cards like Brago King Eternal, Darien King of Jeldor, Menghuo Barbarian King, or even something like Feasting Troll King. Brago is great if you want to take advantage of Surian's colors and have a blinking sub-theme. The others can also be useful in the deck depending on the direction you'd want to take it. As for regenerating them, it's not that hard in our colors. Both out of all the possibilities and effects, Jamavaya Hollow and Asceticism are probably the best ones, especially since they can work on any creature and not just for completing this quest. As for the Grail, there's only one artifact printed so far with Grail in its name, and that's Soul Grail. So if you want to be as flavorful as possible, you can't do any better than that. It's a mana rock too, so it's not entirely useless in the deck. However, in terms of mana rocks, Everflowing Chalice would be a best choice and still comply with the tasks. The reward for completing this quest is pretty busted. You can't receive damage from any non-creature sources, so unless an ability has you literally lose life, only creatures can kill you. So if you make a Pillar 4 or Turbo Fog deck based around completing this quest, you'd quite literally be invincible. Slay the Beast is quite the niche quest since it requires you deal lethal combat damage to a dragon controlled by an opponent. Since there is no guarantee that an opponent is playing a dragon, then just like the Infiltrate the Ranks quest, we're going to have to donate them one. We'd then have to either force the opponent to block with it or force them to attack with it in order for us to deal lethal combat damage to it. We'd have to cast Lure on one of our creatures that has Death Touch to make sure that gifted dragon dies during combat. At least this guarantees the block and the lethal combat damage. The reward for jumping through these hoops? We get to steal any artifact from their library and put it straight onto the battlefield under our control. If that weren't enough, we can do the same with our library too. So we get to cheat 2 of the best artifacts we can find right from the library. So it's not so bad. Domination of the battlefield would unfortunately be completely impossible to complete without stealing basic lands since we can't run basic mountains and basic swamps in our deck. So for the most part, we'd have to exclude it from here. Demonic Summoning is going to be pretty difficult to pull off since Surian isn't black and most demons are black. However, thanks to changelings, that won't be an issue. We can also run right creatures and circles of protection since they're in the color identity. However, what would be the point if we won't be able to take advantage of its reward? The only advantage it would bring would be as a very convoluted way to give Surian +2/+2. At least opponents can't destroy quests, so it'd be sort of like an emblem. That being said, the article did present some ideas of cards where opponents can interact with quests even if they couldn't outright destroy them. Gaia's Geas makes it harder to complete a quest and in most cases impossible to do so. Malthus' Curse makes the reward more of a curse than a reward. These were just ideas for cards though, since Malthus' Curse didn't even have a casting cost mentioned anywhere in the article. However, these are incredibly niche and definitely a meta call. Another card in the article that has to do with quests is one we wouldn't be able to include in the deck, and that's the Fury of King Alaran. This legendary sorcery, that's right, InQuest also gave the legendary super type to a sorcery in their custom cards decades before WotC did. Deals damage equal to thrice the amount of quests we completed, divided any way we choose among any number of targets. Even though Surian wouldn't be able to play it, it's definitely an interesting way to interact with this new card type. One we can run is the final card of the article, and that's Hidden Agenda. Not to be confused with the ability on some conspiracies, this blue instant allows us to tutor for a quest and put it onto the battlefield once we completed at least the first requirement of a quest, so we don't even need to complete the quest to cast it, just have the first part done. I think this card type is very interesting since it does add a new dimension to playing Magic games, and I always love new card types that add more depth and dimension to the game, like conspiracies and heroes, even if you can't use them in constructed formats. Or card types found on oversized cards like Vanguard, Plane, Phenomenon, and Scheme. I not only love this game for how the game is and its complexity, but I also love that you can have different gaming experiences by playing variants of it thanks to these new card types. Maybe Quest can be that such variant similar to conspiracies and heroes. Only the future will tell what Zendikar Rising will have. To all you viewers, which of these cards caught your eye? What do you feel about the potential of even more card types for the game besides the ones we already have? I'm interested in reading your opinions down in the comments. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of Barkeep Upkeep on the Commander Tavern. I'm Demented Kirby, and thanks for listening.